Welcome to All Bodies on Bikes, the podcast, where all bodies are good bodies, all bikes are good bikes, and all rides should be celebrated.
All Bodies on Bikes is a movement to create and foster a size-inclusive bike community. So join your hosts, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marley.
As we explore the complexities of the biking world, help us break down barriers and create the world that we want to see. And don't forget that all bodies really means all bodies, not just larger bodies, but bodies of all sizes, ages, races, abilities, genders, sexualities, and beyond.
Come along for the ride. Hello, and welcome to a special road trip edition of the All Bodies on Bikes podcast, where all bodies are good bodies, all bikes are good bikes, and all rides should be celebrated. This is your host, Marley Blonsky, and for the next 6 weeks, I'm traveling the country bringing you stories from the road, where I'll be living, working, playing, and of course, riding bikes. We've got a bunch of great interviews lined up, from Colorado to Montana, the Washington coast, Central Oregon, and everywhere in between. And when the summer is over, we've got another full season of the All Bodies on Bikes podcast on tap, with a new co-host who you'll be meeting very soon. For now, let's buckle up, fill up the tank, and hit the open road for the All Bodies on Bikes podcast, Road Trip Edition. Hello, and welcome back to the All Bodies on Bikes podcast, Road Trip Edition. This is your host, Marley Blonsky, and I am here with our first extra special episode from the road. I am currently in Fort Collins, Colorado, where we'll be doing our first interview, and I will also be riding in the Foco Fondo, a big gravel race that happens on Sunday. So quick update from the road. Things are going absolutely magically. I will be sure to talk about this more, but I am in an absolutely incredible Van Do It adventure van, which basically it's about a 20-foot long van, about 10 foot tall, and it's one of those big vans that has everything in it. This one is custom built out for this trip, so that means I've got internet, I've got a desk, I've got a bed, I've got a kitchen set up, and I've got lots of space for all of the All Bodies on Bike stuff that I have with me, because on this trip I am making about 7 different stops to make podcasts, to ride gravel bikes, to hang out with folks, and I've really built my summer around this adventure. So without further ado, I want to get into our first interview of the special edition road trip series, and that is with Queer Plus Bikes. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Queer Plus Bikes is a northern Colorado-based queer-centered cycling and community group started by Bethel, Steele and Lauren Mehl in the fall of 2022. Making friends as an adult can be difficult, and Lauren and B wanted to find a way to create space for truly welcoming group rides in a social environment. Queer Plus Bikes invites queer folks and allies who are committed to upholding safe space and welcomes all bodies, experiences, and genders on bikes. Queer Plus Bikes strives to reduce barriers to cycling through their free gear closet, community events, resource sharing, educational opportunities, and monthly multi-surface, i.e. bike path, pavement, and gravel, no-drop group rides. They value creating community just as much as they love riding bikes. Queer Plus Bikes rides on Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and Oceti Sakowin territories. It's very high-tech.
iPhones, I mean.
All right, let's get going. All right, friends, we are here in Fort Collins, Colorado with the folks behind Queer Plus Bikes, and I am so excited. I'm actually staying in their driveway, which thank you so much for the hospitality. Learning all about van life and learning how to plug things in, and when you trip the breakers in the house, it's the same as when you trip the breakers in a van. So thank you. Thanks for letting me stay here.
Of course. Excited to have you here. And we're only on trip count 1, so we'll see how many times the breaker goes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Well, it's been getting at least... So I was up in the mountains over the past couple of days, and it got cool enough at night that I just turned everything off.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing I'll keep a fan on for, noise.
Oh.
But we should be fine.
You do you. Yeah. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Who needs a microwave?
Let's get into the fun. So tell me who you are.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I use she, her pronouns. And who am I? I have been in Fort Collins for about 6 years. Before that, I was in Seattle for about 10 years. So I think we may have overlapped slightly. but I wasn't much of a cyclist when I lived in Seattle.
Well, that's a shame.
I know. I cycled. I did commute every now and then to work, and I did I did a couple triathlons and whatnot, but wasn't out regularly. Didn't discover gravel. But yeah, so now I am a cyclist. Anyone who rides bikes is a cyclist, right? But now I consider myself a cyclist.
Own that.
And I got my first bike back in 2012 when I lived in Seattle. And since coming out to Colorado, I am now a mountain biker. I've been bike packing, and now we've started this little. I call it a little group, but after
it's pretty big.
It's something. I say that all the time, but. So that's what I do with bikes. I work for myself. I became self-employed, about 2 years ago. And so I do communications and administration for small businesses, basically helping people do all the things they don't like to do. And so I have some clients, and then I also work with our local gravel race, Foco Fondo.
Awesome. So, which is why I'm here this weekend. And we'll talk a little bit about what y'all are doing with that. But yeah, I think that's me. Thanks, Lauren. Over to you, B.
Cool. My name is B. I use he and they pronouns, and by day I am a data nerd, and I work in code in the intersection of remote sensing and water quality. And when it's not my day job, I just tinker with bikes and want to ride bikes. I really wish I could just quit my job and still get an income and ride my bikes all day. That's really all I want to do in the world.
And fix bikes.
And fix bikes, yeah.
If only there was more money in the bike industry.
Well, that's a much longer conversation, Marley.
It is, and that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about joyful things. Joy. Well, y'all are really bringing joy to the bike community here in Fort Collins, and when you travel, Grit and Mid-South and Ground in Nebraska. But let's talk about Queer Plus bikes. So I talked about it in the intro a little bit, but what inspired you to start Queer Plus bikes? Can you share the story of how it all began back in the fall of 2022?
We just wanted to make friends.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was the reason that we created this.
So
yes, I love the honesty.
It was. So we, we're still 2022, 2021, we're still in the thick of the pandemic, and I had mentioned I was doing a lot of riding, during the pandemic. It was just a way to get outside, and there wasn't a lot else to do, and so I was riding my bike a lot more. And Bethel and I had met in 2020, and we were obviously both cyclists, so we had been riding a lot with our few friends and us. And then 2021, we had talked about the idea of doing a short gravel series.
It's not even that we talked about it. We told our friend who owned a shop here in town, we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna do a gravel series.
But then we didn't do it.
And then we never did it for a whole year. We didn't do it.
So then, but like I said, I had quit my sort of regular job and started working for myself, and I had a little bit more time. And so in 2022, it had come up again, and I just got on Canva and made a flyer and was we're doing this. And so we hung it up at our friend's donut shop here in town, and
love it.
Yeah, they no longer own it, but they were just so gracious with their their space and everything else. So we hung up a sign. And I don't even think we had an Instagram yet. I was just posting on my own. And we're just hey, we're going to do for 3 months in a row. It was September, October, November. Yep. We're going to do one gravel ride a month.
Yep.
And so
the gravel series happened.
It happened. It did. And I think 1 month we couldn't ride. The weather's weird here in the fall. Yeah.
No, I think we made all of those, but we decided not to continue in December because we ended up doing a gear swap.
Yes.
Ooh.
So we do this gravel series. The first ride, 5 people showed up.
I think it was 10.
I don't know.
You're underselling
it. It doesn't matter. Marley's going to have to cut a lot of this. We're just going to...
No, this is great. I love it.
So people showed up. I think we were doing 3 rides at that time. We were doing a community ride, what we were calling a community ride, and then a couple different gravel distances. So the community ride was just bike path because we were trying to do everything. And
exhausting.
It's exhausting. So we did all that. People were coming, people were excited about it. We started to meet people we didn't know. So when people started to show up that were outside of our friend group, that's when it got pretty exciting.
Which happened in the first 3 months.
It did.
That's huge. That's incredible.
It was, I mean, it still happens and we're still surprised, which is...
That's how I feel about All Bodies on Bikes. I see people, like, wearing our kits. I'm like,
Who are you?
Who are you? How did you find us? And then I'm like, oh yeah, we're kind of a big deal at this point. But Queer Plus Bikes, I mean, you're becoming pretty well known. There's a community dinner happening this weekend with like 60 people coming.
Yeah.
We also have caps now.
Yeah, we like, you know, well, that's a whole other, I just like to, you can make anything and put it on anything. So that's been a fun part.
If you have design skills.
Yeah. Lauren has great skills.
I like to make stickers.
I love it. Well, you recently had a sticker that was like Queer Plus Bikes. What was it? What did it say? Like not a club, just a vibe?
So part of Queer Plus Bikes is people, you know, I don't think people quite know what to make of us. And so sometimes they're like, oh, are you a club? Are you a team? And I'm like, that sounds too serious. And so I was like, no, we're just a vibe. And so after enough time saying that, I just put it on a sticker because I thought it was pretty funny. But it is true. It's you know, we're not a club. We don't post things on Strava, which, you know, everyone has a thing that works for them in their group. But like, that's just never been, that's not like, biking is why we do what we do and it's what brings us together. But that is not actually like the point.
Sure. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. I just thought it was like such a statement, you know, like not a club, just a vibe.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we can ride together, we can have fun, we can build this community and cultivate this like really inclusive environment without putting boundaries around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other mantra that Lauren came up with is come for the bike, stay for the community, which I think is like truly the other ethos that we have here that you touched on a little bit, but like that really succinctly says it, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, sure, we're gonna ride bikes, but like also just show up for the coffee hour. Like, come hang out with us, make new friends.
Yeah, and that was part of it. So when we started the series, a big part of that was the first hour was come and have coffee with us. Come in or grab a tea or whatever you want and just come hang. And if you're not sure about riding or you feel intimidated, you don't have to ride.
Did you have folks that took you up on that?
Yes.
Oh,
definitely.
Awesome.
To this day.
To this day, yeah. And it's a kind of a nice way to say, hey, like, especially people, group rides can be intimidating, no matter how inclusive you make them.
Yeah.
And so it's this nice entryway of just like, hey, like you don't even have to bike here. You can just show up, be in community with other folks, and then decide if you want to ride next time or never, maybe. But
I love that, especially because, like, you know, we all have injuries or for whatever reason or another, we're not riding at that particular moment in time. But to still have that community, because a lot of times, you know, people's social circles get built around the people they ride bikes with.
Yep.
And if you can't ride bikes for, again, whatever reason, so that's brilliant. And I think maybe that's something we'll incorporate into All Bodies on Bikes is that social hour before we ride bikes.
Yeah.
And
it's a good, like, you know, it's a good entryway. Some people show up just for the ride, but I think, you know, we generally have at least, a percentage of every ride that folks just come for coffee. So
that's so cool. Well, let's talk about how you create and cultivate that inclusive space. How do you ensure that the people that should be there are coming and the folks who maybe should not be in this space aren't there?
Well, we can start with how we invite people in. And we like to say that Queer Plus Bikes is for anybody who's excited about riding with a group of people that go by a group name that has queer in it. That seems to be a really great way to like manage the vibes.
Yeah, kind of self-select.
Yes.
The self-selection is there for sure. And then, you know, in terms of like creating an inclusive environment, we try to start every single ride with, you know, kind of like general rules of the road, how to ride in a group, how to communicate what's going on in front of you, to the side of you, what's on the ground, if there's cars around, really trying to support the really fundamentals of riding in a group. And I don't know, that's kind of where it starts, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and we were very intentional when we started the group that we were it was gonna be inclusive of theoretically everyone. So we didn't want it gendered. We called it Queer Plus because it can mean, you know, queer in whatever definition that means to you.
This is another sticker. Queer-ish, queer and queer plus
queer.
Yeah. And that was going to be one of my questions is, what does queer mean? But so, yeah, let's get into it.
Well, so, I mean, right, you can talk to 100 people and they'll all have a definition of queer. And I do think queer, yes, it can be, I don't know that it has specifically anything to do with gender or sexuality. I think queer is how you're existing in the world. Maybe it has to do a little bit about how you want to exist with other people. Maybe your, some people might say political beliefs, but I think some of it is just that outside of the mainstream a little bit. And I think truly, we have attracted sort of that crap. I will just say it's working. If that's, if we had anything, it's working. And we hope people believe that too. But, I think that queer, right, there's a long history of the term queer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back generations, there's been a lot of reclaiming in the last couple decades. And even myself, I mean, I'm 40. And, even in the beginning of my sort of like sexuality journey, like, queer wasn't a word that we used.
Same.
Even in Seattle.
I identified as a lesbian for many years, and that has transformed into queer for a multitude of reasons.
So many reasons.
But a lot of the stuff you're explaining, just feeling outside the mainstream, the people that I date might be of multiple genders, and I just don't fit neatly into that little straight box, as it turns out.
And we say, Queer Plus Bikes is led, it's queer centered. Mm-hmm. So that, so for us that means that those leadership roles, the kind of the way the group moves as far as, the directions are from that, that queer-centered leading. But we always said, we are for allies, accomplices, we call them queer-adjacent folks. And so that is probably the question we get most often is like, hey, can I come to this? I don't, maybe they don't identify as queer. And I was like, absolutely. Yeah. And I would rather 5 people ask me that than people not show up. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so it's worked really well for us. I feel like, and, we've always said we would much rather we want to create as safe a space as we can. Safety is not always guaranteed, but we're going to do the best we can. And I'd much rather have to deal with maybe that one person that you have to have a conversation with because maybe they're asking intrusive questions or whatever they're doing. I'd rather deal with that one person and allow the 150 others, to welcome them in. Yeah.
And it's just such a funny concept of like, you have to prove your queerness.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks who are, newly into this space or newly figuring out their identity, there is this sense that you have to prove yourself.
Yeah.
And I love it on you guys' Instagram. I think it says specifically, like, you don't have to prove anything. Come as you are.
Yeah.
And I really, really appreciate that.
There's so much through the, like, queer culture, too, I think, that there's a lot of, like, society that feels like you have to prove that you're enough of something. And I think that that's exactly what we're trying to break down. Like, you don't have to be enough of anything. Like, you don't have... It's not even...
You are enough as you are.
You are enough as you are. And you are a cyclist as you are. And you are riding the right bike. And you are doing this. And you are showing up. And we get to celebrate all of those things and all of those people.
That's so cool.
Which I think is what your...
I would say it's very, very similar to All Bodies on Bikes, but with the added element. And obviously, All Bodies on Bikes is a very queer-friendly, queer-adjacent, queer-welcoming space. But to have a specific space for queer folks and queer-adjacent is incredible. Let's talk about those group rides a little bit. How far are you going? How fast are you going? What kind of bikes are people riding? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, so like Lauren said, when we first started this, we started having 3 different routes. A community ride that was only on bike paths, and it just did a big loop around. And then once everybody got back from that, we would leave for the 2 gravel rides or the mixed surface rides. Turned out that in the first 3 months, we didn't really have a lot of folks who were showing up just for the community ride. And so we kind of pivoted. And we're just like, okay, let's just continue to do these mixed surface rides. And so we have one route that Lauren usually leads. It's under 20 miles. And then we have another route that's usually between 30 or 40. And if the weather isn't cooperating, like if it's below 40 degrees, we only do the shorter route. If it's really hot, we will only do the shorter route. Most of that is because we're really searching for bike joy.
Yeah.
In addition to like being able to get out on our bicycles. You know, suffering is for some folks, and we just don't want our group to be about that. We want our group to be about joy and community.
I love that.
And so that's what we focus on.
Yeah, and I'd say, so like the shorter route, and we've been able to do this on, I think, every ride we've done. So the shorter route and the longer route. So B said under 20, but it's usually, 14 to 16, it can get upwards when we try to, refresh the routes every now and then. But the cool thing is that we always make a point that both routes, both distances always have the first 5 to 7 miles are together.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, how races will have a neutral start.
Yeah.
So everybody goes, so while we're in the community part of the ride, everyone rides together.
That's awesome.
And so then we usually get somewhere where the split happens. We take a photo and then people ride their ride. So, most people stick together with the group, but we're also like, hey, if you're feeling racy today and you need to get out there, ride your ride, just let a leader know. And so that's been really cool. And then to kind of, for folks that, 12, 14, 16 miles is a lot. And so to get people in too, a lot of that's usually on bike path.
Okay.
And so usually what we'll tell people in our emails is, hey, you can come with us to that point and you can actually just turn right around if you need to and just stay on the bike path.
And then they get a whole 10-mile ride from our, from where we take off.
Yeah.
And that's a really great entry point.
Yeah. I remember the first time I rode 10 miles, and I've told this story before, I thought I was, the absolute coolest person in the world.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
to self-power yourself, that sounds funny, but, to go 10 miles under your own power,
Yeah.
when you've live in an auto-centric world, it's huge.
It's huge.
I still get excited when I ride 10 miles.
Yeah.
Well, especially at the end of a very long
Yes,
day.
yes,
I'm like,
yes.
oh, there's only 10 miles left. But even still.
Yeah, and so as far as we advertise between 10 and 12 moving miles per hour.
Okay.
And so, and we do try to feel out the group, right? And that's always, that's probably one of the hardest things, right? Of any group rides is feeling the group dynamic. And I know sometimes on the longer rides, they end up going faster because usually the group, they're there to ride longer, but, and we always call them social rides. But there's certainly maybe a crew that's getting at it.
Yeah.
And so, we always sweep, and it's no drop. And so when we say no drop, we mean no drop.
And every single person.
Every single person. And
I
so
don't care what the speed is that you're going. If there's someone who's going slower than what we would typically go, it probably means that I'm going to go to the back and ride with them unless they don't want me to ride with them. I will explicitly ask them, do you want someone to ride with you like me? And, and sometimes they're like, yeah, no, you can go ahead. But most of the times they're like, yeah, I would love that. Because part of cycling is building up that endurance, building up your stamina of, even if it's 8 miles an hour, if you're going 8 miles an hour over 24 miles, that's 3 hours in your saddle.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
It's a long time.
It's a long
Let's talk
time.
about the fact that that's still a really long time to be in your saddle. That is an endurance athlete. You are an endurance athlete if you're going 8 miles an hour and going 24 miles.
Yeah.
Hey, preach.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna preach for myself.
Please, I love it. Because I think more folks need to hear it, and they need to acknowledge it for themselves.
Yeah.
Just because we're not putting down the times of the people on the podium doesn't make us any less of an athlete, any less of a cyclist, any less of an endurance athlete.
Right.
Well, and I think one of the gaps, so other than being, kind of queer centered, one of the gaps we were trying to fill was that, even as I was pretty regular cyclist, group rides are hard.
They're not accessible. Especially here in Fort Collins.
Yeah.
And I want there to be something for everyone. And I love people getting at it and pushing themselves. But I was finding they were very intimidating. And even someone who I felt pretty comfortable and proficient on a bike, I could never keep up.
Yep.
And so we wanted to find a space where we were creating longer rides and longer opportunities for people to be on a bike in a safer space. And I think that was sort of why we love those community rides, but honestly, it's really nice to have a 30-mile ride where someone will be like, this is the longest distance I've ever ridden.
Yeah.
Because they've never
100%.
felt safe to do otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they can challenge themselves and do it in a way that feels really good.
Yeah.
I love that.
And to answer your question about bikes too, just really quick, you might cut this out, you might not. The bikes that show up, the people, are amazing. The bikes are also amazing. We literally have everything from recumbents to folks who are riding like townie bikes. We had our friend come up from Femmes and Thems who rode with us the 30-mile route on a 7-speed townie bike. She's also she's a really strong rider.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to be.
Yeah, truly, pulling a 35-pound, very heavy townie bike with 7 gears up some gravel in northern Colorado definitely takes a certain person to do that.
Yeah.
But even folks on road bikes, you can come on most of the gravel in northern Colorado, especially in Larimer County, where we are right now in Fort Collins. The way that they treat their gravel roads is with something called mag chloride. This is where we start to get nerdy. It just means it's really smooth, and it kind of feels like chip seal, and it's not like your typical gravel road where you have pea gravel.
Yeah.
Which makes it really accessible for a lot of different kinds of bikes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Will I get to ride some of this in Fort Collins?
That's all you're going to be doing tomorrow.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I am so excited. We're kind of segueing, started talking about bikes, but I want to know more about this gear closet. What is it? How does it work? How did it get started? Tell me all about it.
I literally have no idea.
I know.
You know. Go for it.
So it started at that gear swap at the end of... in
2022.
December, at the end of 2022. Because we noticed that there's a lot of folks who are just like, well, I don't want to keep this. I'm not going to be able to sell it here. I don't want to keep it.
This was at the gear swap.
This is at the gear swap. Would you mind, could you find a home for this eventually? And a lot of it was clothing. And one of the things we know is that having the right gear to ride a bicycle and ride it for 3 hours, no matter what speed you're going, is really important.
Yeah.
Whether it's a saddle, whether it's your chamois, whether it's having a good fitting jersey, whatever it is that makes you feel comfy. Shoes, cycling shoes, big one. And so that's kind of where it started. And then there's this really big gear swap that happens here in Fort Collins called the Rio Swap.
Okay.
And it's literally 50 different vendors. And they all show up, and
It's a garage sale,
it's a
essentially.
big old garage sale.
Yeah.
Everybody has a table, and you're wheeling and dealing and trading. And anyways, at the end of that, we ended up collecting so much kit and so many parts.
Yeah.
So this really runs the gamut from everything from shoes to helmets to jerseys and chamois to chain rings and full drivetrain kits.
Dang.
Yeah. Well, and we, I think some of this too, because we were riding in the fall and winter, people didn't have a lot of that kind of gear to ride in inclement weather. And
It's hard to find, and it's expensive, and if you are outside of the standard size range, good luck, Chuck.
Well, and we're all about, it's wear whatever you want to ride a bike. Please don't let that stop you ride. And there are, even I, eventually I was oh, it's nice to have a pocket, or it's nice to have this thing.
The first time I had a chamois that fit, I was this is why people wear those silly little shorts.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Exactly. And so I do think it started some of that winter gear. We were just people, it'd be nice to have extra gloves to give to people. And we certainly were already doing that, right? With friends. It's bike packing gear we're swapping, or hey, I have this extra thing, would you use it? So it was kind of already just something we were doing with friends, but we just noticed it was just such a nice thing for our community. And so Rio Swap let us come in March, and I just was hey, I pitched the idea. I was hey, what if we came, and then at the end of the night, any of the vendors who didn't want to bring stuff home, they could just donate it to us. We're basically offering a service, right?
That's huge.
And we got so many things. And so, it's sort of, and it's been really cool. It's grown, it lives in our garage, but we've been able to bring it out to events. And so, we've even gotten bikes that we've gotten to, fix up and give to people as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
You guys are really doing a service for the community. So do folks reach out to you and say, hey, I'm looking for a XYZ. Do you have it?
Yep. We just recently had somebody come over and they're hey, I've got flat bars on my bicycle. Can I change it over to something with the drop bars? And might make it a little bit more comfy for longer distances. And they and I just chatted for a while, and it turns out that we had the right gear to swap over everything on their bicycle.
That never happens. That's incredible.
Right.
Yeah. All they had to do was buy a new derailleur, because, we don't need to go into the nerdiness of it, but essentially $50 for
A whole new setup.
For a whole new setup. And we got to do it together, which is like one of the other things that I love to do is like tell people, come over, let's talk about your bicycle. Let's explain how your derailleurs work and how your brakes work, and let's bleed your brakes together. Let's, change your shifters out.
And I think that is what, that is not my skill set. I run Instagram, I write emails, but B really enjoys that one-on-one time, just like helping people who want to know more about their bikes. And we did a class, like a workshop early on when we were doing this, and it's a lot to have 10 people in a class learning about their bikes. And so we've kind of shifted to this model where, gosh, I feel like several Sundays around here, there's just multiple people showing up, and B's just doing one-on-one work with them. So
I wish I lived in Fort Collins. This all just sounds magical and welcoming and like what we all need in our lives.
Yeah. Come to the Queer Plus Bikes office hours. You can learn how to tune your derailleur.
I love that. Well, kind of wrapping up here, a couple last questions about like the broader impact of Queer Plus Bikes, and what the future of Queer Plus Bikes looks like. How does your community give you feedback? Do you take that into account? And what does the future of Queer Plus Bikes look like?
Yeah, I actually did send out a survey this last, it was our first full year, 2023.
Congrats.
And so sent out a survey, and it was, probably in my spirit was probably like longer than most people like, but it was asking like, do you feel safe? Do you feel like included in those things? And that's something we also, right? And so people can give feedback that way. And of course, lots of nice things were said. And so it's always one of those things trying to keep several kind of avenues of communication open, because everyone's comfortable, right, giving feedback in their own ways. And sometimes we get direct feedback at a ride. And that's something we always talk about, like, hey, like, whether it's because B is riding with someone and they're chatting, we can get feedback that way. And also, we're learning things all the time, which I'm sure you are as well. And something we started doing, someone who came to one of our rides let us know that they were a little hard of hearing. And that so verbal signals weren't that helpful. And it was something that immediately we're like, that makes so much sense. And it was something we hadn't thought about. Yeah. And so immediately every ride since, we always talk about how verbal and visual signals are important to do both, or whichever one you feel comfortable doing on a bike. And so, it's those little easy things are ways we can quickly support our community.
But they make such an impact.
Yeah. We don't, I think at the end of the day, right, so the types of rides we do and what we put together, we can't do every ride for every person, and we want to do it for as many people as possible. Yeah. And so, the times we've had some people come on rides and maybe they've turned around at a certain point, like it was too long for them, or it was too fast for them, we always try to make a point to catch up with them after, like when they get back, to say, hey, like, can you tell us a little bit more? Is there anything we could have done differently? And trying to have those one-on-one conversations, because, right, like it's hard to give feedback.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so just trying to create space for that. And we're going to make mistakes, and hopefully what we can do is continue to learn.
I feel like that's a hallmark of really good leaders, is the not even just willingness to ask for feedback, but the desire to get that feedback and to incorporate it in. And I think a lot of folks could learn from the way that y'all operate.
Well, and I think, B can speak to this too. I think another way that, right, sometimes feedback on a ride or after a ride is hard, right? Like, you're tired, you're doing whatever. And so
you're working really hard to put on this event for 50 people.
And it's hard to be in the moment. And so, we try to do community events. We try to do at least one sort of non-bike event a month. Summer's pretty busy. So, but like in the winter, we might do a craft night, or, last Thanksgiving we had a ton of people, we had a big dinner at our house. And so I think that whole stay for community bit also allows like a way to allow more in-depth conversation and allow feedback to come in a different form too, and to just have, and it's not even feedback sometimes, right? It's just having conversations with different people.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah. Well, wrapping up, where can folks find out more? Where can they join a ride? And then if you had advice, let's answer that. Let's do that question first, and then I'll ask my final question for both of you. So where can folks find Queer Plus Bikes?
You can find us on Instagram. We're at Queer Plus Bikes, all spelled out.
So PLUS is squared,
Yeah,
spelled
exactly.
out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And we will have a link to that in the show notes, of course.
Yeah.
And then my last question is, I think y'all have given folks a lot to think about in terms of what an inclusive group can look like and what an inclusive ride can look like. Do you have any additional advice to share if folks are hearing this and they're inspired and like, I want to start that in my community. I want friends. Making friends is hard. Like, yeah, let's do that.
Do it.
Yeah. I say that, right? And it's hard. Organizing is hard. Marley, you know
Organizing
that.
is hard.
And it does take a lot of time and energy. And I think some of it is like, find a friend who will do it with you, right? You don't have to do everything on your own. And start small. Like, commit to 3 months, once a month. Like, I tell Bethel all the time, we're never going to be a weekly ride. That's just never going to happen for us. We have full-time jobs. We do a lot of other things, and we want the bike joy to stick around. And so
that's really smart because a lot of people do overextend themselves, especially when they're getting into organizing. So that's great advice.
Start small, organize one ride, see how it goes. And we did flyers. I mean, I think social media is great. It's how we communicate a lot now, but we just hung up a few flyers and people got excited and told their friends. So
anything to add, B?
Remember that bikes are for joy, and that you don't have to compare your ride to anyone else's. I think that one of the things that we do in general as humans is we compare ourselves, and I think that kind of sets us up for failure. And so remembering that you don't have to compare yourself, and you just get to be yourself, and you get to enjoy your ride. I think this is where we all chant the ABOB.
Yeah.
All bodies are good bodies.
Yeah.
All bikes are good bikes. And every ride should be celebrated.
Yes. It's funny. I've been thinking about that last line because I'm good friends with Meg Fisher, and she hates the word should. And so I'm trying to think, is there a way that we can rephrase that?
All rides are celebrated.
All rides are celebrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So maybe we're changing it. You heard it here first, folks. Well, Lauren B., thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you're putting into the building and cultivating this community. And I'm really excited to play bikes this weekend with you in Fort Collins.
Let's play bikes.
All right.
This is an All Bodies on Bikes podcast powered by Feisty Media. The show is produced by Maggie and Marley and edited by the team at Feisty Media. Thanks for listening.